All right, hello, everybody coming in. I see some familiar names and some new names. Welcome in. We're gonna get started in probably like 2 minutes. Give people enough time to come in, the stragglers, the people who are like me that had to calm their sons. But in the meantime, feel free, if you can, in the chat, put your name, where you're tuning in, and the current temperature it is outside. For me, I'm in Vegas, and the high today is 98 degrees. So that's really warm for me. It's actually pretty cool. Oh, the kids stand. Hold on. Okay. I'm in Vegas, so it's really nice outside. Right now it's 98 degrees. That's like fall for me. Kyle, what's your temperature outside? I'll have you introduce yourself later, but what's
I
it
think
like there?
it is 83 degrees. It's pretty humid though. It's been like off and on stormy here for the last couple hours. So
Oh, goodness. I do not like humidity. And that sounds too cold for me.
DC is always humid.
Ugh. All right, folks, if you're jumping in, feel free to put in the chat your name, where you're at, where you're tuning in from, and your current temperature. And we'll get started. Give it one more quick minute, maybe like 30 seconds. Normally we have some bumping tunes. I actually had some like tunes that were all about electricity and power because that's gonna kind of be the theme. But Zoom blocked me, so and I don't think anyone wants me to sing, so we're just gonna have to be musicless until we start. All right. Got 203 for me, so we'll go ahead and get started. So first off, thank you everybody for tuning in to our next Green for All webinar called Progress and Power, the Need for Permitting Reform. This will be recorded, so in case you need to step out and calm a kid like me, or you miss anything, we will send out this video after the webinar, or probably the next day or two once it's uploaded. And feel free to share it out to organizations or other folks that might be interested in this conversation or who might have missed out today. Here's the agenda. We'll go through some introductions. You may have seen me already, but I'll still introduce myself. And then we'll talk about some permitting process basics for folks who may have not been familiar with this issue or don't exactly understand what the permitting process is. We'll make that apparent for you guys to really highlight the problem. And then we'll talk about the benefits of permitting reform. We'll go into the Reform Act of 24 that the Dream.org reporting. And then we'll take a good amount of time. Oh, hopefully you guys can hear me. It says my internet's unstable. But we'll take a chunk of time to actually take action on this. We have a really cool action that we'll need your help amplifying. And then we'll go into questions. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A function in Zoom. If you don't see the button, just press the three little dots, and then you can see Q&A. You can enter your question there. If it's easier, you can enter your question in the chat, and then we will answer it at the very end. But don't forget your questions. So make sure to put them in as soon as you remember, just to help you out so you don't forget. And then, yeah, we'll take a significant amount of time to answer your pressing questions towards the end. But yeah, I will move it to introductions. So, hi, my name is Tori Soriano. We haven't met yet. I'm the digital organizing manager here at dream.org. I'm from Las Vegas, currently in Las Vegas, Nevada. I use she, her pronouns, and I help kind of amplify our GFA campaigns and issues. And so permitting reform is actually an issue that Dream.org has actively been working on and having talks around at the Hill for over 2 years now. And so this is the first time that we're actually talking about it and bringing it to supporters like you, to really, talk about what permitting reform is and why we support it. And so I'm going to move it to Kyle, who will be acting expert on this issue for this webinar. So go ahead, Kyle, if you can introduce yourself.
Thanks, Tori. I will do my best to explain this very complicated issue and why after 2 years we're bringing it to all of you. So my name is Kyle Kameen. I am the policy director for our Green for All work here at Dream.org. I am based in Washington, D.C. I have lived here for almost a decade now. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri. Lived there the first, 23, 24 years of my life or something like that. And I've worked in the government affairs and policy space for about a decade, and in the climate and green economy space now for about 5 years. So excited to be here with everybody again. For those of you that I've met, it's good to see you again. For those of you I haven't, it's nice to meet you. And let's dive in, and happy to answer any questions you have later as well.
Oh, before we begin, we're going to do a Menti moment. All right, let me switch screens 1 second. So for those of you who have never done Mentimeter before, it's kind of like a fun game where we get to learn more about each other, and you could compete against each other, but not for this one. But I'm going to show up the instructions. So you go to menti.com. Oops, it's loading. Menti.com, and then you enter this code. You can also scan the QR code to enter in. This will just help kind of frame this conversation for today and kind of help highlight one of the issues that's going on with permitting reform, or the need for permitting reform, I should say. The code will be up here at the top. It says join at menti.com, but I'm going to switch screens. Oops. There we go. So the question is, how much was your energy bill? Oh, you can ignore this little subtext. How much was your most expensive energy bill? My toddler is preventing me from answering, but before I got solar, my most expensive energy bill was $350. Oh my gosh, I'm seeing more than that from folks. We got 225. That's my 225 was my average before
Lord.
going solar. But $400, $650. Oh my, that's like a tuition payment or something.
Student loan payment right there.
Yeah, exactly. That is insane. All right. Thank you everybody for participating. And with that being said, I'll share my screen again, and we'll talk about the permitting process. Let me just share. All right, Kyle, take it away.
Thanks, Tori. So when we talk about the permitting process, we're really talking about the process by which infrastructure projects in this country are built and how they get approval from different levels of government to build those projects. So as you might imagine, the bigger the project, typically the more approvals or permits that those projects need. When we think about big infrastructure, particularly when we think about climate related infrastructure or energy related infrastructure, we're thinking often about, any pipeline that you hear about, or transmission line, as you've heard more and more about in the last few years, or a solar farm or a wind farm. These are the kind of infrastructure projects that are very much a part of, the daily effort in this country to build a green economy that works for everybody, to reduce emissions and to reduce pollution across this country, particularly in those communities that have been hit the hardest over the decades, and really need to see those benefits and that investment. The challenge is that as we have as the process has evolved over the decades, it has really stagnated our ability to build those kinds of infrastructure. As you can see here, the permits we're talking about are on average in the 5-year range, 5 to 6, 7-year range. But for some projects, particularly large transmission projects are great examples. It can take as long as 17 years in some instances, 20 years. And when we think about the challenges that we face today from a climate perspective, particularly, right, climate change isn't waiting for anybody, but also for communities that are really sitting with the burden of pollution from past harms, but that continues to harm them in the present day because there aren't alternatives to bring energy into those communities due to the lack of transmission infrastructure. These timelines are really problematic. And what's happened is that when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act were passed, those were tremendous opportunities, right? Those provided a ton of money for us to really start addressing climate change at a national scale. But what that meant was suddenly a ton of money was injected into a system that already was struggling with the volume of construction and projects that were happening at that lower dollar level. And as you might imagine, those delays are getting worse, the lines are getting long, and there is little ability at this moment under the current structure to really address that in a meaningful way. And that has led us as an organization and many others to be engaged over the last couple of years in both educating ourselves more on the permitting process, but also having meaningful conversations with other groups, experts, and staff on the Hill to really learn about this issue. And it has taken the 2 years since the IRA for us to start to see meaningful compromise legislation introduced in the Senate and possibly in the House, but we'll see. You can go ahead to the next slide, Tori. So when we talk about reforming the process, right, permitting reform, what are we talking about, right? There are a couple of big buckets that for DREAM, for our goals of building a green economy for all, are really imperative. So any compromise that we get behind is going to need to do these two things. It's going to need to upgrade the power grid. So that is anything from increasing capacity of the current grid. There are lots of technologies available to do that without having to build entirely new lines, entirely new structures. But it's also going to mean building some of those new lines and structures where there are gaps and inability to move power from one place to another. That also will help improve reliability, as we have seen, over the years as climate change has accelerated and storms and hurricanes have gotten worse, and heat has become more of a health issue even than it was before. More long enduring and sustaining heat domes as we've seen. It's really becoming imperative that people have reliable power and that there is the ability for power to be moved around the country to meet those needs. And our current grid, in part due to its construction, but in also part due to its age, is really struggling to meet those needs. And report after report, year after year, really demonstrates that. And finally, at the end of the day, we really need to achieve cheaper and cleaner energy for all. I think we had a few examples of high electricity bills. God bless the person that had to spend $650 on their electricity bill. That is brutal. And the average American family, that's just not sustainable. And so we really need to seek to achieve cheaper and cleaner energy for all. And so upgrading the power grid is a huge component. Another is really accelerating the ability to build those clean energy projects. Those might be the grid projects, but they can also be any number of the components that you saw in the IRA or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That could be geothermal technology, that could be offshore wind, That could be, some of the projects in reference to like retrofitting buildings in pre-existing housing. But we need to be able to take advantage of that funding in a way that is providing, good paying, family sustaining jobs, particularly, union jobs where possible. That gets a little tricky depending on the state, but those are a great option. And, most importantly, beyond that is the net benefit needs to be that we have cleaner air and water, not only today for people that live in those communities today, but for future generations so that they don't have to bear the health burdens that previous and current generations have had to bear due to, the infrastructure that we have that brought us here today. So from our perspective, when we look at legislation, we step into it with these questions. Does it help us achieve these things? And if it does, then we need to look at what are the compromises we're making and how does, and is the net benefit enough for us to pursue it. So, Tori, you can go ahead and move on to the next slide. This is touching a little bit onto what I was touching on, and I will, explain each of these a bit with in the context of the legislation we're going to discuss. But I think meaningful community engagement is both a big goal of ours, but also potentially one of the most challenging components of any permitting reform. And we'll discuss a bit about how we think that this current legislative proposal actually is going to help with community engagement in a number of ways. So quickly, just while we're on this slide, the Energy Permitting Reform Act was is the result of 2 years of negotiating in the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. This is no small feat. This was a very hard-fought compromise with lots of external engagement from groups like DREAM, but also a tremendous amount of staff and committee work inside of the Senate, really trying to find a way to reach an agreement to break this logjam. And so the bill was introduced in July and passed out of the Senate and Energy and Natural Resources Committee with a bipartisan vote of 15-4. And that is a tremendously strong committee vote under any circumstances. So it was a strong bipartisan message in support of this piece of legislation. This video.
Oh,
Go ahead, Tori.
I can go right. Yeah. So this video, this was put by actually, I can explain, Kyle, if you want.
Sure. This is actually a former colleague of mine, Dana Nuccitelli, over at Citizens Climate Lobby. Dana is a climate writer, brilliant guy, and he put together this short explainer video about what's in the bill, some of the nuts and bolts of what's in this piece of legislation. So we're going to share it with you now.
Yeah, let's see if it works for me to just click it. Perfect. Can you guys see this?
Yeah, we can't hear it though.
Okay. Oh yeah, you can't hear my sound. Okay. Well, there are subtitles. But hopefully the visuals will help you guys see what's going on. I apologize. We had new admin system that won't let me share my sound. So let me refresh and I'll play the video.
The permitting process is acting as a bottleneck, preventing us from building and connecting clean energy fast enough to meet our climate commitments. That's why CCL has been lobbying for clean energy permitting reform for almost 2 years. A few weeks ago, Senators Manchin and Barrasso introduced the Energy Permitting Reform Act. This is the kind of comprehensive, bipartisan permitting reform legislation we've been hoping to see. The bill's been endorsed by climate champions in Congress like Senators Coons, Heinrich, and Hickenlooper, and advocacy organizations like the Nature Conservancy, DREAM.org, and the Bipartisan Policy Center. We're confident that the Energy Permitting Reform Act will reduce climate pollution, and so CCL is jumping in to support its passage. That's because it'll help us build clean energy infrastructure faster, like electrical transmission lines, solar and wind farms, and geothermal and hydroelectric power plants. The bill will also tighten up timelines in the courts, making sure that energy projects don't get tied up in lawsuits years after they've been permitted. It also has some unfortunate provisions related to oil and gas. But fossil fuels are traded on a vast global market, and so changes to US production don't make a big difference in terms of global emissions. The best way to stop the pollution that's overheating the planet is to bury under an avalanche of clean energy, and the Energy Permitting Reform Act helps make that happen. CCL volunteers already placed more than 500 calls to help this bill pass its Senate committee vote at the end of July. And we're gearing up to keep lobbying for it through the end of this Congress. Remember, with permitting reform, we can unleash clean energy here in America, stop climate pollution that's overheating the planet, and protect the people and places we love. Research has shown
All right, hopefully, even without sound, you guys kind of got what it is, and maybe you can explain a little bit what he was talking about, Kyle, for folks who couldn't follow along with the video.
No, I think we could hear it. I could hear it.
Oh,
Yeah, I think it
perfect.
worked out. Yeah.
Good to hear. But yeah, we see this as a net advantage for the climate. And so we, along with other groups, are supporting it. I think, yeah, unless there's anything else you want to talk about it, Kyle.
Yeah, I'll just jump in on a few things that Dana touched on, and that I think are most important for us. You know, as Dana mentioned, and you're going to see a lot of this in relation to this bill in articles that you read, and it's accurate. You know, there are components of this bill, it's the nature of compromise, that seek to benefit the oil and gas industry. For example, you will see that the bill calls for more offshore oil and gas leasing and onshore federal lands oil and gas leasing. The thing about it is that the bill also calls for more offshore wind leasing. And under current US federal law, in order to have more offshore wind leasing, you are required to have more offshore oil and gas leasing. So it's a bit of a catch-22, but as we figure, and as you just heard in that video, if you unleash transmission properly and the economics of renewables and clean energy play out, they're already more cost-effective or have at least cost parity with oil and gas. At the end of the day, the benefit to clean energy and emissions reductions is going to vastly outweigh any oil and gas benefits. And so many of those leases we suspect will not even go into production just because the economics won't work out. It's an unfortunate reality of compromise, and there are components, as he said, and as I just said, that we don't love, but we think that the benefits are really worth it. And the transmission title alone is extremely strong, and we're excited to see the benefits that could reap for renewable, reliable, clean energy across the grid.
Oh, sorry. My kid was noting that I need to go to the next slide. So we need your support to help secure these votes on this crucial bill. As you can imagine, there are some folks some senators that have openly been in support of this bill. Some of them were mentioned in that video. There have been opponents of this bill that we're hoping to persuade into supporting it so that we can, see this bill go through. And then there have been most of the senators that haven't given any say on whether they support the bill or not. And so we want to see if we can use this time at this moment to help, persuade this bill. I mean, we're at Dream.org. We love to thank folks that, help us out, pass the legislation that we like to see. We're not a big fan, but I know people love passing the pitchfork when folks vote against what they don't love. And so this bill, before the Senate vote, we want to help influence change, and we want your help to get that change accomplished. And so I will walk through what the action is going to look like. Yeah, share my screen, different screen. All right, so I'm going to put this new link up in the chat right now. Take action. There we go. So for this action, you can actually see where your senator currently stands in supporting permitting reform and the Energy Permitting Reform Act. You can give the explainer here, but basically, if you take action, You will be sending a letter to your senator to either thank them for supporting this bill and standing with us on our path to clean energy. If your senator has openly opposed the bill, you will generate a letter urging them to rethink their stance and support progress. And then if your senator hasn't taken a position, this will be a letter sending them to help break their silence and stand for clean energy. And so we need your help to shape this action. I don't know, Kyle, if you want to talk about some of the conversations that you've been having with folks on the Hill around this issue. But you can mention that after I show you the action, since we're already here. And so how this action works is you'll put your information in and it will generate the letter based off your senator. Because you have 2 senators, you'll be sending one to each. And if you want to know how your senator voted, you can click on their name, their highlighted name. So for instance, my Senator Cortez Masto from Nevada, she actually has supported this bill. And so I will be sending her a thank you letter and support and encouraging her to continue the conversations to help get this legislation passed. My other senator has not given the stance. So this will be a letter to consider supporting the Energy Permitting Reform Act. And so if you could go to this link, enter your address, it will generate the letters based off of your senators. Click on them. You can see, how your senators are doing or if they support the Energy Permitting Reform Act. And then you can add your voice and submit the letter. We see this as an uphill battle. We're going to be actively working on this issue for at least the next few months, maybe longer. And so we could really use your support to kind of help promote this action a little bit more. And so feel free to click the link, take the action, and then, there is some share options if you want to share it out on social media to help us further extend and amplify this action.
Yeah, and Tori, I can, as you said, I can jump in and just provide a little context for people on, timing and timeline and some of the conversations that we've been having.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Mhm.
Yeah, so as far as legislation goes, this thing actually might move pretty fast. It looks like this is likely, if this is going to pass, that it would be during the lame duck period, and that would mean after the election, but before the end of the year, essentially. So that is lightning fast for a piece of legislation in any Congress, but particularly in a Congress like we've had for the last 10 years. Legislation, just typically big legislation especially, just doesn't move this fast. And so right now we're in a really interesting period where the legislation's only really been out and passed out of committee for about a month, 3 weeks, and lots of members of Congress, particularly in the Senate, probably haven't had a chance to really dive in and assess this and get a good position on it. And so this is a really great opportunity for advocates to get a chance to kind of be in early communication to their member of Congress and their member staff and let them know, like, hey, you should take a look at this. You should really consider this piece of legislation. And as Tori pointed out, we really only have about a quarter of the Senate on the record on this legislation. You had 19 votes in committee, so that's about a fifth, and then you had 5 or 6 other members who have come out, with statements in support of the legislation since then. Otherwise, folks are kind of quiet, and that's because they're not on the committee, so they didn't have to consider it yet, and they don't know when it's going to come to the floor just yet. Although, as I said, we have a pretty good guess. So hopefully that gives some context as to our sense of urgency and purpose around this, and gives you a sense of how you can be influential in this process in the early stages.
Thank you, Kyle, so much. I think that's it, unless you have any other things to mention around Energy Permitting Reform Act or just the permitting process or permitting reform in general.
Yeah.
If not, we can open it up to questions.
I'll do a quick, just kind of, kind of closing statement on permitting reform in general, and then I think we should open it up to questions. I think ultimately what this issue comes down to is the status quo isn't working. It's not working for communities. It's not working for our energy bills. It's not working to, build clean energy and move this country into the 21st century, or, with a green economy that works for all. It's not working. And so regardless of, folks' position on permitting reform, kind of at a high level, I think if we're honest with ourselves, something needs to change. And this is an opportunity to be a part of that change and to be a part of change that can really catapult us into a cleaner, more reliable energy future that benefits everybody and not just some. And so I think I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, so we have a question. How does this issue look post-election or
Hmm.
after or during the election?
Yeah, it's a good question. Post-election is a little hard to predict. I think we have been thinking about this a lot. If it is status quo, so divided Congress and a Democrat president, we think that the issue probably still passes in lame duck, and they just kind of clear it off the plate for the next administration coming into office. If it were a sweep by one party, one way or the other, so meaning both chambers of Congress and the presidency were either Democratic or Republican, we think it probably kills the legislation for one reason or another. But given our current political dynamic, we feel that those two scenarios are pretty unlikely. Not to say they can't happen, but just in this current moment, if you take the temperature of things, I don't think it's likely that we end up with, a Republican president and both chambers of Congress are Republican, and the same for the Democrats. I think it's probably a divided Congress, and one party will have the presidency.
Well, thank you.
Mhm.
And if anyone else has any questions, feel free to drop them. I don't see the Q&A section, so if you don't have the option, just feel free to drop it in the chat. We can answer your questions. Or if you feel comfortable enough, you're welcome to come off mute. You can say your question aloud. All right. Hearing none or seeing none. Yep. I just want to reiterate that this presentation, this whole recorded webinar will be available. I will be sending this out to all the attendees, whether you RSVP'd or not. So you can help review this issue. This isn't going to be the first time we talk about this, but this was the first introduction kind of explaining permitting reform, our stance on it, and the Energy Permitting Reform Act. So I want to thank everybody for coming in, listening in, tuning in, and then, of course, the digital action. This is called a cheer and steer because we will be cheering on folks who have supported the bill and then steering them to, or urging them, nudging them towards supporting it if they've opposed or haven't given a stance yet. And so the cheer and steer will be sent out via email as well following the webinar. So if you didn't get a chance to submit it, feel free to do that afterwards when I send it out. And of course, if you have any questions or you've heard any questions or you've come up with any throughout the weeks, feel free to send them my way or to Kyle as well. We are, like I said, actively working on this. And so we'd love to hear your questions, your concerns, or your support for this issue, because we'll definitely need it to help push it through. But thank you for tuning in. Thank you for participating in the action. And I think that's it.
Thanks, Tori.
Thank you, everybody.